In the spring of 2024, Brian and Lynette Hooker traveled to the Bahamas for a vacation. They were a married couple from Michigan. They had made the trip together, just the two of them, the kind of getaway that couples take when they want to step away from the ordinary rhythm of their lives and spend time together somewhere warm and beautiful. On April 7th, 2024, Lynette Hooker went into the water near their boat. She did not come back out. Brian Hooker told authorities that his wife had fallen overboard, that it was an accident, that he had done everything he could. Lynette Hooker was 43 years old. She was a mother. She was someone's daughter and someone's friend and someone who had gotten on a plane to the Bahamas with her husband for what should have been a vacation. Her body was recovered from the water. And from the moment investigators began looking at the circumstances of her death, questions emerged that have not gone away. Questions about what happened on that boat. Questions about what Brian Hooker did and did not do in the time between when Lynette went into the water and when authorities were notified. Questions about the marriage itself and what was happening inside it before that trip to the Bahamas. Questions that, as of the time this video was recorded, had not been answered by an arrest or a charge or a public accounting of what really happened to Lynette Hooker. This is her story. Lynette Hooker was from Michigan. She and Brian had been married for years. By the time of the Bahamas trip, they had built a life together, a home, a family. On the surface, it was the picture of an ordinary American marriage. What was happening beneath that surface is something investigators have been trying to establish since the day Lynette's body was pulled from the water. The Bahamas presented immediate jurisdictional complexity. When an American dies in another country, the investigation involves both the local authorities of that country and potentially American federal agencies depending on the circumstances. Bahamian police conducted the initial investigation. American authorities, including the FBI, became involved given the nature of the questions surrounding Lynette's death. Brian Hooker's account was that his wife fell overboard. Accidental. A terrible tragedy on what was supposed to be a romantic trip. Investigators did not immediately accept that account. The details that emerged in the days and weeks following Lynette Hooker's death painted a picture that diverged significantly from the story of a simple accident. The timeline of events on that boat raised questions. The specific sequence of what Brian Hooker did after Lynette went into the water, when he raised the alarm, who he contacted, and in what order, how long passed between the moment she went overboard and the moment authorities were notified, became central to the investigation. In cases involving deaths at sea or in open water, timeline is everything. The difference between an immediate distress call and a delayed one can be the difference between a rescue and a recovery. It can also be the difference between a story that holds together and one that does not. Investigators looked at communications. They looked at financial records. They looked at the state of the Hooker's marriage in the period leading up to the Bahamas trip. In homicide investigations involving intimate partners, this is standard practice because the overwhelming statistical reality is that when a married person dies under suspicious circumstances, the spouse is the first and most important person investigators look at. What they found in those communications and records has not been fully made public. What is known is that the investigation remained active and that Brian Hooker remained a person of significant interest to authorities. I want to talk about the broader pattern that Lynette Hooker's case fits into because it is a pattern that deserves more attention than it typically receives. Vacations and travel create a specific kind of vulnerability. When a couple travels to a foreign country or international waters, they are removed from their support network. There are no neighbors who know them, no family members nearby, no friends who might notice something wrong. They are two people in an unfamiliar environment where the normal social infrastructure that surrounds a relationship at home simply does not exist. For someone in a dangerous relationship, that isolation can be terrifying. For someone who intends to harm their partner, that isolation can be an opportunity. The cases that fit this pattern are more numerous than most people realize. Gabe Watson, an Australian man who was convicted of murdering his wife Tina on their honeymoon dive in the Great Barrier Reef in 2003, drowning her during a scuba dive and swimming away. He was convicted in Australia and later faced charges in Alabama. Darren Mack, whose wife was killed, and whose case involved significant evidence of financial motivation and prior planning. And the broader category of what investigators and advocates sometimes call the honeymoon murder, a phenomenon documented across multiple continents where new spouses or romantic partners die under suspicious circumstances during travel, often in locations where jurisdiction is complicated and witnesses are few. Lynette Hooker was not on a honeymoon, but she was in a foreign country, on a boat, with her husband, with no witnesses to what happened in the moments before she went into the water. The Bahamas has a complicated history with cases involving American tourists who die under suspicious circumstances. The death of Naya Okami in 2023. The deaths of 3 American tourists at a sandals resort in 2022 that initially raised enormous public concern before being attributed to carbon monoxide poisoning. The broader pattern of cases where American families have felt that investigations into their loved ones' deaths were not handled with the thoroughness they deserved. The relationship between Bahamian authorities and American investigators in cases like Lynette Hooker's is collaborative, but not without tension. Bahamian police have primary jurisdiction over crimes committed on Bahamian soil or in Bahamian waters. American agencies can assist, and in some circumstances take the lead, but they do so within a framework of international cooperation that requires negotiation and sometimes produces friction. For families of victims, this friction can feel like an obstacle standing between them and answers. For Lynette Hooker's family, the wait for those answers has been defined by exactly that kind of uncertainty. As of the time this video was recorded, no charges had been filed in connection with Lynette Hooker's death. The investigation was described as ongoing. Brian Hooker had not been publicly named as a suspect in official statements, though the investigation's focus and the nature of the questions being asked by investigators had been reported by news outlets following the case. The absence of charges does not mean the absence of suspicion. Investigations of this kind take time. Building a prosecutable case in a foreign jurisdiction involving complicated forensic and circumstantial evidence is not a fast process. Prosecutors do not file charges until they believe they can prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. Sometimes that means waiting for evidence that takes months or longer to fully analyze and interpret. Lynette Hooker's family has been living in that waiting. The particular torture of not knowing, of having lost someone you love under circumstances that do not add up, of watching an investigation move at the pace investigations move while the grief is immediate and permanent, is something that comes through in every case we cover on this channel. It is something Lynette Hooker's family knows in a way that nobody who has not experienced it can fully understand. There are things worth knowing if you travel internationally and something goes wrong. The U.S. State Department's Office of American Citizen Services provides assistance to Americans who die abroad and to their families. They can be reached through the State Department's main line and through American embassies and consulates in foreign countries. The organization Families of Americans Abroad provides resources and advocacy for families navigating the complicated intersection of foreign jurisdictions and American legal interests. If you believe a loved one has died under suspicious circumstances abroad, you have the right to request that American authorities, including the FBI, become involved in the investigation. You have the right to independent forensic examination of evidence. You have the right to legal representation in both the foreign jurisdiction and in the United States. These rights are not always easy to exercise, but they exist. Lynette Hooker was 43 years old. She was a mother and a daughter and a friend and a woman who got on a plane to the Bahamas for what should have been a vacation with her husband. She deserved to come home. Her family deserves answers. And if those answers exist in evidence that investigators are still piecing together, then the only thing left to do is wait and hope that the legal process produces what it is supposed to produce. Accountability. We will continue to follow this case as it develops. If charges are filed or new evidence becomes public, this channel will cover it. If you have any information relevant to the investigation into Lynette Hooker's death, the FBI accepts tips at tips.fbi.gov. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Do you think charges will be filed? Do you think the jurisdictional complexity of this case makes accountability harder to achieve? This community asks the right questions, and I want to hear them. If you are new here, subscribe to the Unsolved Vault. We are here every Tuesday and Friday with the cases that deserve to be told. We will be back very soon.